everyone, I'm your host Neha and you're tuned into Durian Dreaming, the show that brings you extraordinary stories from seemingly ordinary experiences in Indonesia's fast-paced market. Let's dive into today's conversation with another inspiring guest. Hi everyone, welcome to Durian Dreaming. Today on the podcast, we'll chat with Stephen Luchterhand. He's the President Director of Flora Food Group. Yes, the team behind Blue Band, one of the products which has been in the Indonesian household for close to 90 years. In this podcast, we'll talk about how he maintains the heritage and legacy of the brand. We'll talk about balancing the plant-based and dairy offerings, making sustainability part of daily life, and how Indonesia could play a big role in shaping the future of food. So without much ado, let's welcome our guest, Stephen Luchterhand. Hi, Stephen. Welcome to the podcast. So, Stephen, Upfield was born in 2018 when Unilever had spun off its spread business. And then it became Flora Food Group, right?
Yes, correct. Right. So 2018, the business was bought out of Unilever, right? It was spun off from Unilever, bought by a private equity company. And we just recently went through a name change at the end of last year, right? So we were originally called Upfield, and we switched to Flora Food Group. So why the name change? Well, it really doesn't mean anything to people in Indonesia, but Flora is one of our largest global brands, very big in UK, Europe, and Australia. And I think a couple of reasons. One is that brand will resonate a lot more with investors, right? As we look at where our company goes into the future, whether that's through an IPO or some other sort of sale. But the brand itself will resonate more with investors and with consumers than Upfield, which is really just a concocted name, right? So realistically, for us, we think it makes more sense because, we're a bit of a strange company because we're a young company in that we're 7 years old, but we've got legacy brands that are over 100 years in age, right? So it's a funny mix of a young company with more of a insurgent, get stuff done type of mindset, but with these, grand old assets which have been around for generations.
Right. Actually, that brings to my next question, Stephen, because so one of your very talked about product for Flora Food Group is Blue Band, right? Which
Yes,
is what? And correct me if I'm wrong in understanding. Is it the margarine or what is it?
So Blue Band, well, I guess it started as a margarine. Blue Band just celebrated its 100th anniversary last year. It started in the Netherlands, and then I guess as part of the Dutch association with Indonesia, it was brought to Indonesia around 90 years ago, right? So we got to celebrate the 100th year last year for the brand globally. But then in about 10 years' time, it'll be celebrated again in Indonesia being 100 years in the country, right? So Blue Band, predominantly margarine, right? But we do have creams. We do have other products which are available. We sell the cream in Indonesia now, mostly in food service. But the portfolio, I would say, is 90% margarine at this point in time, right? So where it will be in the future, I think it's a fantastic brand, well respected. It's a nostalgic brand. People tend to, every time I meet people, every time I interview people for jobs, I ask them about Blue Band, right? And they generally say, oh, I remember making cakes with my grandma in the kitchen or something like that brings them back to, feel-good moments. And I think it's a really well-known brand in Indonesia. It's a highly respected brand.
Actually, yeah, that's what I wanted to ask because, like you said, Blue Band has been in the Indonesia market for close to 90 years now and globally about 100 years.
Correct.
So in Indonesian market, it's like a family tradition. Like,
Yes.
The younger generation would have seen their grandmoms using this in their kitchen.
Yeah.
But today consumers are very different. So how do you balance the heritage or the legacy of a brand which is close to 90 years old with the push to innovate?
Yeah. So, you can't lose your DNA, right, for your brand, right? And I think, as much as that nostalgic feel fits with people today, it won't always fit. Mums of today, grandmas of tomorrow, they're working people. The whole work single income has changed, right? So families don't have the time that they had before, right? So we can't just rely on that to continue, right? In terms of, I think, you will always see that Blue Band will always have nutritious, high quality products. It's just part of the product proposition, right? It always has fortifications with vitamins and omega-3 in the case of our core product here. But, we have to look at, how we resonate with those younger consumers. And I think that means you have to get on their terms, right? So the whole marketing approach is totally different than what it would have been, even 10 years ago, right? So a lot more focus around digitals and connecting with them on their own terms, TikToks, short recipes, things that today it's all about convenience, right? So we need to be seen not just as nostalgic, but also convenient as well.
Okay. You talked about the use of TikTok now. So the way you would reach the younger generation or the Gen
Yeah.
Z Indonesians. So while
Yes.
the product is the same,
Mm.
right? But the people's preference and taste have evolved. They have become more health conscious, health focused. They're more digitally influenced. So have you noticed these shifts in taste and preference coming through in your business?
So, most of our consumers still recognize that, they use Blue Band for its signature aroma and taste. It's something which we're very fortunate that even in the world of copycats and intense competition, we've been able to maintain a signature which resonates with consumers. I think in terms of the connecting with TikTok consumers and Instagram consumers, it's really like how do we get ourselves into how do you stay relevant in menus, right? How do this everyone's an influencer nowadays, right? I mean, it doesn't matter whether you have 20 followers or 20,000 followers, right? People still look at what you're doing and want to understand what you're doing, right? So us finding ways to make sure that we remain relevant with those users, especially giving simple menu solutions, opportunities to use the product, making sure people understand and recognize, especially young mothers, the nutritional benefits, to include it as part of their meal solutions is the challenge, right? But it's not easy, right? Because these trends, there'll be another TikTok in 5 years' time, whatever that will be, right? So how do you stay on top of that is really the big question, which I think most brands are really asking themselves about right now. Yeah.
Stephen, can you recall any campaign which was running few years back to the older consumer, and then you had to tweak it or make it more adaptable for the current Gen Z population?
Yeah. So we've got a campaign now which is a spoonful of difference, and it's highlighting the omega-3 elements which are part of our products, which are not in other products in the market, right? They don't have the same inclusions, the same fortifications. Um, I really like what we've done in the current campaign, where in the past we were saying, a spoonful of difference. You only need to add a spoonful into your meal and you get the omega-3 nutritional content coming through for your family. But we've tweaked it in terms of like showing, there's a great ad that we have at the moment where two kids running and they're in a race, and the kid who's been on the Blue Band meal is that spoonful in front of his competition because he's got the additional nutritional inclusions. And I think it's a simple way of just being able to highlight that, nutrition does make a difference in kids' lives, and especially in a country like this where stunting and malnutrition is still such a critical issue. The little things that parents can add to their kids' menus can really make a big difference, right? So, yeah, I really like what we've done there. So, waiting to see the results, and hopefully it's a success for us.
Yeah, I really like how you innovated, given it's the same product, but the message is being now conveyed in a different way, more
Yeah,
resonant
correct.
with today's Gen Z.
Yeah, correct. Right. And you know what I mean? Marketing's a little bit hit and miss, right? Yeah. I mean, you're a marketing background. So, it's, you try things, you test it, you tweak it, right? So I think it's really important that, we stay on top of things, and things that don't resonate, you change out of quickly, because, you don't want to, you want to make sure that you're making the impact for the money that you're investing. Yeah.
Right. Stephen, Flora Food Group has become synonymous to plant-based eating,
Yeah.
right? And analysts in Indonesia are predicting double-digit growth for plant-based foods in Indonesia. So where do you see the biggest opportunities ahead?
So as an organization, majority of our products are plant-based, but we do have dairy elements associated with many of our products. So Blue Band is a plant-based product here in Indonesia. But some of the bigger selling products that we have around the world would have portions of dairy, or dairy or milk fat included in them. So I think, the reality is that, we're looking for the best of both worlds, and you can alienate consumers if you say you're pure plant-based. The word vegan is not necessarily seen as a friendly word for marketing. It's seen quite niche, right? So we don't want to be seen as niche. And we want to have nutritious products which are good for all consumers. So when you talk about opportunities ahead, right? So, we're looking at many different areas. I look at plant proteins, right? And I think, especially for this country, the government's quite ambitious on their school lunch program investments at this point in time. It's quite a topical thing. It's very topical given for the wrong reasons, when you see some of the food that's been served and the poor, people ending up with food poisoning, etc. So I think plant proteins could be a really good one, right, in terms of helping people to get the nutritional contents, but with probably a lower food safety risk. And probably the government should be looking a bit deeper into those types of things. I think also with, with the way that food science is going, it's you can basically fortify anything, right? So there's really nothing that would stop us from doing a Blue Band with protein, right? So, those things could come out in the future, depending upon which way, if we can crack the technology.
As a CEO, you're constantly looking at datas and trends. So, what's one subtle but fascinating consumer habit that you've noticed emerging in Indonesia over the past year that you think is going to be a game changer or a big deal?
Well, I guess, one of the things I would say, and it's maybe not over the last year, but probably over the last 5 years, is, Indonesia's top dish has changed, right? So like, it was nasi goreng, and now it's ayam goreng, right? So there's some subtle differences in terms of what consumers uh, are eating. And then as part of that changes the consumption of our products, right? So we need to be on top of that and be thinking about where's those next trends going to be coming, and how do we tap into the current trends with either with our existing portfolio, or find ways to enter with a portfolio that can allow us to be part of that market, right? So, and I think that that's one of the areas where we'll see some change for us in the coming years, because, we'll probably look at other areas outside of, pure margarine and creams, which is what we sell today.
Stephen, I want to dwell a bit more about your career progression so far, because you're one of the leaders in Indonesia who moved from a finance role to management role, now a president director. Finance is all about very data driven, control, precision, while consumer brands need creativity and an instinct. So,
Yeah.
how has your grounding in finance shaped the way you run a brand like Blue Band?
I think of finance, and I think there's two types of finance people. There's people who count the money, and people who make the money. And very early in my career, I worked out that counting the money was pretty boring. And so for me, right, within finance, you need really good, strong financial controllers who are very good with controls and making sure that your accounts are reconciled, that your financial statements are produced. But to be honest, I never really found any of that fun, right? Never found any of that really engaging, right? So I was always gravitating more towards the commercial side of the business and working very closely with, um, the other departments to see how we could, grow the business, become bigger, shrink cost bases to become more profitable, how you play with pricing to make sure that you could find the right mix, the right prices to drive the sweet spots, to drive the right share and the right volumes, right? So I think, for me, that uncertainty, right, is exciting, right? It's a little daunting at times when you're uncertain, but it's very exciting. Problem solving is really energizing. And, I'm a finance guy by background, so I'm naturally a data guy. So I really love how we can try to use data to, reduce the risk associated with decisions. There's always risk in every decision. And, early on I had a manager who said to me, don't make 3 decisions and get 3 right. Make 30 decisions and get 27 of them right. So then that way you're like, you're getting more things done, but don't worry about perfection, right? So sometimes you have to make those decisions with uncertainty. And to be honest, I think that's the fun, right? Because and in life, when something doesn't work, you try and work out why it doesn't work and then how I can fix it, right? And as long as you continue on that learning cycle, then and you act quickly, then I think you can adapt to anything, right? So
Right.
the thing I really love with facts, right, with data, right, is data overrules facts overrule hierarchy. So your boss can think that they're right, but if you've got facts that suggest otherwise, it's a really strong thing. And I think anyone who's at a junior level, who's maybe a little afraid to challenge their boss's opinion or question, if you've got the facts on your side, then you've got nothing to fear, right? So always ask the question.
Usually people say that either you're born with the left side brain or the right side brain. So your creative side or your analytical side. Fortunate enough, you're born with both sides of brain, and what it looks like, you're balancing it so well. But had there been ever in your career span any conflict where you had to give way to the creative side and let the analytical side take a back seat?
Oh, many lessons along the way, right? Um, very simple things, right? And I think that this is one of the things that, when I look at my career, right, you know, early on, you if you want to make the decisions, you need to be thinking about when you're doing the analysis and you're coming up with recommendations and insights, what would you do if you were the boss? And from there, you put forward your opinions and thoughts, and sometimes the decision is to do something else. And I think it's really important that you try and understand the why, right? Because it doesn't mean it was wrong. It just means that there was a different frame of thinking behind it, And I had a really good example probably a decade ago, right, here in Indonesia, where I was working for Coke at the time, and we had a customer who didn't achieve their targets for the year. And so me as a finance guy was, no, they didn't hit. It's black and white. They don't get their conditional incentives. And the CEO said, no, we're going to give it to them, right? Because the reason they missed their incentives was because of an external factor that wasn't related to them. So it wasn't their performance that caused them to come down performance-wise. It was actually an external factor. And his thinking and his logic on this was, hey, I'll sacrifice the short term for a long-term relationship improvement. And for me, being purely thinking through a finance lens, I was like, save the money, right? Improve the profit. But when we discussed that with the customer, and the customer understood that we would still give them their incentive even though they didn't achieve, honestly, the goodwill that came from that lasted, another 5+ years, because next time you went to negotiate with the account, it was a much easier process because you'd built this loyalty, you'd built this,
Right.
this heart with the customer, right? And so I think, some of those things are good lessons along the way, right? So don't just think about the short term, but also balance up the long-term impacts of the decisions that you make.
Stephen, you have been in Indonesia market for quite some time now, and you understand the landscape, the consumer mindset very well. So this thinking of long-term relationship versus short-term, achieving short-term goals, do you think is it very Indonesia specific? Because we know it is a very relationship first driven country.
Yeah, it
Or
is, right?
can this, yeah, or can this advice be applicable across markets and across companies?
No, look, I think it is. I think it's applicable across all.
Mm,
Indonesia is uh, yeah, look, I mean, there's a lot of very successful Indonesian companies,
mm,
who some companies who, I look at with great admiration, right? In terms of how they do business. And especially, you know, we've gone head to head with them many times throughout my time here, and have been outwitted by the Indonesian companies many times, right? So I remember thinking coming here, you know, Western MBA teach the Indonesians how to do business. It was the other way, right? So their approach is long term. Um,
mm,
the they're willing to lose money or break even in categories for long periods of time, which I think they realize that they can outlast many of the multinationals, right? So as long as they've got understanding owners, then they're playing the really long term game. And I see it with some of our customers. We've got some fantastic customers who've been with us, for over 50 years, right? So and I meet with some of them on a regular basis, some of the larger customers, and there is this great loyalty towards the brands that help the companies that help them to get to where they are, right?
mm.
And while I think that's fantastic, in the end, we need to be careful that you're not lazy and arrogant to think that that will continue to stay, right? You have to still think about how you're going to help them to improve their business and take their business forward to the next level. So that partnering is very important.
Stephen, you have a very impressive career. So, if I ask you, what advice would you give to finance professionals who are willing to make that leap from finance to general management?
Yeah, look, uh, like I said before, there's two types. There's the ones who count the money and the ones who make the money.
Mm,
I think to make the leap, you've got to be the more commercial orientated type of person. Someone who's always thinking of, and not just thinking of financial metrics, but thinking of the drivers of the financial metrics, right? So, the drivers of, you know, eh, the drivers of your P&L is how much volume you sell at what price, right? At what margins, right? So understanding pricing, price relativity to competition, margins, market share, whether you're winning or losing, um, um, numeric and weighted distribution, some of those um, concepts which are not naturally finance metrics, but they're key drivers of whether your business is going to be more successful, I think is important. So I would say get outside of your lane. Don't just stick to financial metrics, and find people to partner with that you can learn from, right? Because I guarantee there's a sales guy in your organization who doesn't know anything about finance, and a finance guy who probably doesn't understand the intricacies of sales. And there's a great opportunity to work together to learn from each other, and develop those relationships, which will really help you to be able to ask the dumb questions, right? In a safe way, non-judgmental, because you can just ask as an outsider, right? And I think over time that if you have that natural curiosity, that will build, and then find that confidence to speak as part of the broader meetings, right? Don't just stick to the finance topics. If you've got questions that you want to challenge the business on, ask them, right? Because you know what, you only get one career, right? And if you sit back because you're not curious enough or you're too scared, Sometimes you got to have the courage to ask the questions. And if you're wrong, then you learn and understand why you're wrong, right? And then next time you can understand maybe how you would handle the situation differently, right? So I always think you're better to try and fail rather than not try, because in the end, I think everyone's more capable than what they give themselves credit for. But sometimes we're probably just a little bit held back by our own heads, I think, more than what others. I think others around us tend to believe in us more than what we do ourselves, right? So don't be afraid to try.
That's a brilliant piece of advice there, Stephen. Thank you so much. One last question.
Yeah.
The podcast is called Durian Dreaming, and
Mm.
durian has a very acquired taste or a unique taste. So, what's the boldest or most unusual food experience you've had in Indonesia?
Yeah, well, this is the land of exotic fruits, right? When you look at fruits in this country, there's so many weird and wonderful looking things that I'll be honest, I've never seen before in my life in Australia, right? And I remember, my first 3 years in this country and looking at mangoes in the shop, and the mangoes here are green. And I was like, oh my God, they're so unripe, but here they're really juicy but I think, back to the exotic fruits, durian, I've tried it. I can't say I like it. But you look at other things that they do here. Pandan leaf in baking is a unique aroma. Salak, snake fruit is another weird and wonderful one, right? But then from a Indonesian food, probably, I don't know, a gado-gado or something like that, which is like a nice mix of spice and peanut sauce with fresh salad and vegetables, I would say. Yeah.
Yes. All right. Thanks, Stephen, for a very candid and sharp conversation and some golden advice for all our finance professionals who are looking to make a leap to general management. Thanks once again to be a part of Durian Dreaming podcast.
No problems. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you.
And that's a wrap for this episode of Durian Dreaming. I hope today's discussion sparked some new ideas for you. Don't forget to subscribe, share your thoughts, and stay tuned for more exciting stories. Until next time, keep dreaming big.